Hey guys, today's episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is brought to you by our friends at the Faith in Sports Institute at Baylor University's Truett Seminary. The Faith in Sports Institute, man, it's a wonderful place where Christian leaders in sports are formed and equipped through theological education, practical training, and thoughtful resources. They offer graduate degree programs, including this brand new online Master of Arts in Theology and Sports Studies. They also offer continuing education classes, intensive retreats, and more. To learn and grow with the Faith in Sports Institute, check out baylor.edu/Truett/FSI. Again, that's baylor.edu/Truett/FSI. Think deep, lead strong, and run the race well with the Faith in Sports Institute at Baylor University. Check it out today.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
And welcome everyone to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. So glad you're tuning into the show today. Check us out over at sportspectrum.com for all of our free content there, devotionals and podcasts and articles and testimonials, videos, all sorts of free resources available at sportspectrum.com. If you have a guest idea, a topic, something we should be covering here at Sports Spectrum, you can email me directly. Jason@sportspectrum.com is my email address, jason@sportspectrum.com. It's always great when you can bring a Hall of Fame golfer to the show today, and we got Betsy King as our guest, LPGA Hall of Fame golfer. We're talking about 34 LPGA Tour victories. We're talking about count them, 6 LPGA Major Championships, including the U.S. Open twice and the Women's PGA Championship in 1992. She was named the PGA Tour Player of the Year 3 times in 1984, 1989, and 1993, and inducted into the World Golf Hall of Fame. Now she's doing incredible work with Golf Fore Africa. It's a wonderful charity helping serve and using the world of golf to serve those in need in Africa. She founded that in 2007, and we're going to talk a lot about the trip that she took to Africa that changed her life forever. We also talk about her faith and coming to faith in Jesus when she was just turning pro early in her pro career back in 1980. This was a lot of fun talking to a legend, really, LPGA Hall of Fame golfer Betsy King, our guest today on Sports Spectrum. Let's take a listen. Betsy King, welcome to Sports Spectrum. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
It is. It's great to have you on. Certainly a storied career as a golfer, but some other cool things that God has done in your life as well that I'm excited to dive into. One of the things I was thinking of that we could start was, and I don't know this, I know you're connected on some level with some of the current golfers, but how are you when it's a Sunday and an LPGA Tour event's going on? And are you watching a lot of these events, or are you just kind of caught up in other things that you don't get a chance to watch as much as you would like?
I watch fairly often. I mean, I usually don't sit down and watch a whole telecast, but I'll kind of check to see. And particularly if there's somebody I know up there doing well, then I'm liable to, watch more. I mean, the level of play today on the LPGA is really amazing, and it's fun to see. And I get to, pre-COVID, I'd get to 2 or 3 events a year. Because of my charity Golf Fore Africa, we use a lot of current LPGA players to play in our events. So it's important for me to be out there. I'm actually going to be headed to the desert beginning of April, end of March for the Chevron Championship, which in my era was the Dinah Shore tournament. And this is the last year it's out at Mission Hills in Rancho Mirage, California. And they have a past champions dinner. So because of that, I get out to a few events a year.
And it keeps you connected too with the current golfers, like you mentioned, especially with your charity.
Very much so. We do 3 big pro-ams a year, one here in Scottsdale where I live, one out in Florida and Jupiter area, and then one in the New York area. So that's what I'm concentrating on right now, recruiting players for our New York event because it's in June this year.
That's great. Yeah, we're going to talk more about Golf Fore Africa in a second. I loved how it kind of came together and how the Lord had, such a hand in that even happening. But before we tell that story, I want to go back a little bit because we are the intersection of sports and faith and Jesus. And I would love to hear your story of coming to faith, to Christ. How did that take shape for you over the many years that it happened?
Well, I grew up going to church, but as many people know, you can go to church and it doesn't really impact your life outside of that one Sunday. And that was me. I mean, I wasn't a wild kid or I didn't get into a lot of trouble, but I just really didn't think about God very much or Jesus. So when I got out on the tour, I met a couple of the older players that were believers, and they invited me to a retreat that we used to have at the beginning of the year called Tee Off. It was at the start of the LPGA season, and it was back in 1980, and there I committed my life to Christ during that retreat. So it was obviously the biggest change in my life. Gosh, that's over 40 years ago. Yeah. And really becoming a part of the Christian fellowship group on tour made life on tour a lot better for me. It can be a lonely place to be traveling, but I made a lot of friendships through the fellowship, and we'd get together one night a week as a group and studied the Word. We had speakers that came in, and it just really helped me. My story is interesting because I was traveling so much. I really didn't get to go to church that much. I always say when I share my faith that, for me, if I was in church on a Sunday morning, that was probably not good because that means I missed the cut and I'm not going to make any money that week. So, we were kind of like the Church of Acts, where we would meet in people's houses, we'd meet at hotels, at the golf course, and, one night a week. And so most of my growth as a Christian came outside a normal church setting.
So it makes me think, because you said 1980, so you were in your early 20s at that point, or mid 20s. When that happened, what was the biggest difference between, I say BC, right? The Betsy King before Jesus and the Betsy King after? What was the biggest difference?
Well, probably just more of a sense of peace, both on and off the golf course. It's golf's unique in that, you don't have a guaranteed income. Most of the other sports, you sign for a salary, and, if you do really well, you get some bonuses. But in golf, outside of endorsements, which in my era were not a lot, sponsorships off the golf course, you were really dependent on how you played on the course. And so I know for me personally, I found that a lot of my self-worth was based on how I did on the golf course. So if I did well, I felt pretty good about myself. But if I didn't play well, I didn't feel that great about myself. So having I always say when I share that God loves me the same whether I shoot 68 or 88. And that just really freed me up to go out there and give it my best, not to look at what other people were doing, but just to do the best with the talent that God has given me. And that really made a big difference for me.
How were you able to intersect the two early on? I know for me, I became a follower of Christ. I was 27. And I was working at ESPN at the time here in Connecticut, and navigating how to be a follower of Christ and still bring that into your vocation. That was a struggle for me. How were those early years for you after you became a follower of Christ and sort of navigating into this world of golf? You were having success, but you didn't have, from what I'm reading here, the big success didn't come until a few years later, maybe towards the end, mid to late 80s. But how are you navigating that sort of faith and golf intersecting, if you will, during those early years?
Well, it was kind of funny because I remember one of my aunts said to me, you've lost your competitive edge, once I became a Christian.
Wow.
And I didn't really feel that was the case. It was just more that, physically my my swing technique wasn't good, and I really needed to make some changes there. So I became a Christian in January of 1980. I found a teacher later that year that I worked with through most of my career, and really his name's Ed Oldfield, and he's really the one teacher that I credit for most of my success. And that came. I started working with Ed later that year, and that's kind of when things started to turn around. I won my first professional event in Japan at the end of 1981, and I just kept getting better from there. But I, as a golfer, we're individuals. I'm not part of a company. I can make my own decisions for the most part. So there wasn't that struggle of I'm working for a company and they're doing something that I don't think's ethical. So from that standpoint, I feel very blessed. I always say when you're out there on tour, it's like you're the boss and you have your own company, and you kind of get out of it what you put into it. Nobody's telling you to work hard or to go out and practice when you don't feel like it. It's really up to you. And I know for me, another thing that helped me a lot was through the fellowship group, we got involved in doing a number of projects off the course, like Habitat for Humanity builds. I traveled with the fellowship to Romania twice, and it really gave me a bigger perspective that golf was just one part of me, and it really was just my job. And you work at your job the best you can, and then you move beyond that. So
Betsy, how do you think you handle, because you talked about you were getting better and better after 81 or so and winning that first event, and then you really have some success. We're talking about major championship victories, and in the 80s into the early 90s, there's a lot of recognition that comes with that success. How do you think you handled that when you look back and you think about the success and the accolades and everybody kind of patting you on your back? And that can be, in talking to a lot of other athletes in many different sports on this show, that can be something that if you get caught up in, it can change your focus, or you can lose your identity in some cases into what God says. Like you said, you're no different. He doesn't love you any different if you shoot 60 or if you shoot 80. But in the sense of that, those accolades, we can get caught up in that. How do you think you handled your success when that started coming?
I think I did pretty well. I mean, I was blessed because my parents didn't respond to me that way. Sometimes you see players out there that even their, people that they know really well kind of respond to them by how they're playing. And that to me is when it's really destructive. You expect that from people you don't know. That's the only connection you have with them is your golf. And so, they want you to do well. And it's kind of like, people that you don't know would be, they'd see you and it would be, hey, what'd you do last week? How much money did you make? What'd you finish? That kind of thing. So you get used to that, but it's when people that are closer to you react to you that way that it's really tough. So I feel very blessed that my parents never responded to me that way. Some of the parents today are so much into their daughter's games that it's frightening. They're out on the range with them. And I said the only time my dad ever came out on the range was to ask me what time we were meeting for dinner that night. If they were out there, watching me play, they would come out probably somewhere between 6 and 10 tournaments a year. Fortunately, at that time, we played a lot of events in the Northeast, and I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and that's where they were living. And so there were a number of events that were within a 4 or 5 hour drive that they could come to. And then they would do, a couple of the bigger events. They made a couple trips to Europe to watch, the Solheim Cup, or we played an event outside of Paris, so they would tie it in with the vacation. But it's that helped me a lot. And just again, I was involved with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, so that again gave me a bigger perspective. That God uses us on the course, but off the course as well. And so I don't think I really ever got too caught up in what my clippings said.
Hey guys, taking a quick break from our podcast to tell you more about our friends at the Baylor University Faith and Sports Institute. They are awesome. It's a place where Christian leaders in sports are formed and equipped through theological education, practical training, and thoughtful resources. They offer graduate degree programs, including this brand new online, yes, I said online, Master of Arts in Theology and Sports Studies program at Baylor University. They also offer continuing education classes, intensive retreats, and more. The Truett Seminary, Baylor University Faith and Sports Institute. You need to go check it out at the website, baylor.edu/Truett/FSI. Again, that's baylor.edu/Truett/FSI. Think deep, lead strong, and run the race well with the Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor University. Check it out today. Betsy King is our guest here on Sports Spectrum, the LPGA Hall of Fame golfer, 6 LPGA Major Championships. Take me through, I hate saying favorite because they're like your babies, I have to imagine. They're all favorites, but there's got to be one that stands out that maybe is most memorable for you. Which one is it?
Well, I 2 of the majors, I guess I won the U.S. Open twice. And, that's kind of the one tournament when you're a kid, as golfers that are listening would know this, that when you're on the putting green and you go, oh, this putt's to win the U.S. Open, you're always fantasizing. And, to actually have it happen, years later was pretty neat. So that was special, first U.S. Open win. And then I won the LPGA Championship by 11 shots, and that was definitely the best that I played in a tournament. I played really well for 4 days. When you play 4 days, there's usually one day that you're struggling more than the others, that you're not hitting the ball quite as well, and you just have to try to score the best you can. But that week, I felt like my game was on all 4 days, and I had a 6-shot lead going into the last round and got it to 11. So those 2 wins probably stand out more than any of the others.
Yeah, when you're in the midst of such a large lead, how's the mindset work? Because golf is such a mental game as much as it is talent. What's the mindset when you're thinking back to that moment? I call it like the Michael Jordan moment, right? The zone, if you will, when you're at the top of the top. And we've seen guys like Tiger Woods do that, when they're at their best. There's just, I watched a Secretariat clip recently, the horse race from like 1973, and he just pulled away, and the closest was this far back. I mean, it was, when you think about winning a giant tournament like that, a major by 11 shots, there's something going on there. Like there's a zone factor, if you will. And you kind of described it as playing your best, but mentally, if people are listening and trying to understand that, where's your mindset? How are you focusing? How are you staying in tune to what you're doing and not getting caught up? And, because that's how you lose leads, is when you start looking back and seeing how far up ahead you are. Do you remember any of those moments mentally and what you were kind of dealing with?
Well, that particular week, as I said, my timing was good and I putted well. I mean, you can't win a lot of events on any of the tours without being a good putter. Yeah. And I, became a pretty good putter. And when you're making putts, there are just times that you just feel it. You see the line, and they lip in instead of lip out, and that was just that kind of week. I think the first round I holed a bunker shot on the last hole for a birdie, and then just kept getting better from there. And it was a very tight golf course. I drove the ball really well. So you had to keep it in play. I'd say it was a ball striker's course, and I've always felt that was one of my strong points. But anyway, it's I don't know if you ever feel like you're for me personally, that you're in a zone, but it's just you feel like your timing's on. And it's a weird thing, because I've had times where I've hit the ball poorly on the range, like even right before I tee off. And then I remember one time in Jamaica, the first event of the year, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm struggling, and I prayed in my quiet time, Lord, do you want me out here? Let me know if, you want me to stay out here. I'm willing to do anything you want. And I shoot 64 that same day and win the tournament. So I felt like I was struggling going into the week and even that morning. So it's golf's a funny game that way, particularly when you play professionally and you're playing week in, week out. You never have your timing on all the time. When you play amateur golf, you're trying to peak your game. you might play, say at the collegiate level, you're playing 6 or 7 tournaments a year. And then in the summer, 3 or 4 events. So you have time in between each one to try to peak your game. But when you're playing on the tour, you might be playing 4 or 5, 6 weeks in a row. And so you just have to kind of go with what you have going on and hope that it comes back, work on it and hope it comes back.
Well, it came back quite a bit, 34 LPGA Tour victories for you, Betsy King, but nothing maybe as important as the work you're doing with Golf Fore Africa. So take us to that and how Golf Fore Africa came to be.
Well, I was still on the tour. We, through our Christian Fellowship group, we did a project. We raised money for a village in Ruvu, Ramidi, Tanzania. This was back in 2001. And we were supposed to travel there, but when 9/11 happened, the trip was canceled. So I never made it there at that time, but I had the opportunity to go to Africa in 2006 with a group of women that World Vision took to Africa to see the effect of poverty and HIV/AIDS on women and children in particular. And it was pretty heartbreaking. It was hard to see, to hear stories of women and girls that had suffered numerous things. And, I just came back wanting to make a difference. So formed Golf Fore Africa with a friend, and we started raising money in the golf community. I'd been on tour for 28 years. I know how generous golfers are. And so we just started hosting events to raise money. And here we are. That our first event was in 2007. And to date, we've raised over $14 million. And I'm working on 4 different events right now that we have coming up in the next couple months, through the middle of June. So it's, and I've made 25 trips to Africa. I kind of thought when I finished my career that I would kind of stay home more. That's one of the things about playing professional golf. You do a lot of traveling, and little did I know that I would make diamond on Delta after my career, not while I was playing. So I just love doing it every time I go. It's been the last trip we made was December 2019, kind of right before the pandemic really took off. So I'm missing being able to get there. But every time I go, I'm inspired by the people that we meet. Many of them are believers, and they have, next to nothing. We go to villages where they have no clean water. They don't have electricity. And so we come in and fund, we partner with World Vision, and we fund wells and mechanized water systems. And you can't believe what a difference that makes. I mean, well, obviously the health of the children and everyone in the village improves. The number one killer of children under the age of 5 in the developing world is drinking dirty water.
Wow.
And so, there's a pretty easy solution to that. It's just to have a clean water source available. And so when that happens, health improves. A weird thing is economic opportunity improves, because the village comes up with ways to use the water. Most of them are raising crops, and that helps their crops. Then they're fed better. More girls will attend school because they're not walking for water. Because it's usually girls that are tasked with walking for water, girls and women. So it's very life-changing. Something as basic as water can make such a difference, but it really does.
Yeah, and you brought some of your fellow golfers with you as we talked to a couple of them. Tell me what that experience, I mean, you've described the experience, but maybe a story, right? Something that you've seen, that you've gone, I mean, it's just 25 trips to Africa. So there's got to be incredible stories that you've seen. Is there one that you could share that kind of sticks out for you?
Well, I want to share 2, one involving me and one another golfer. But when I went, one of the early trips that I went on, we went to a house of a woman whose husband had died of AIDS, and she had AIDS herself, and she had 5 children and thought that they were HIV positive as well, but she hadn't had them tested yet. And when we arrived at her small home, she was cooking 1 egg for the entire family. And, we have poverty here in the United States. I don't deny that at all. But the level of poverty that you see there is just, it's so different than what you see here. And there isn't any government agency to help you, or food banks, et cetera, to come alongside you and help. But anyway, this woman had gotten on the ARV drugs. A lot of people don't know this, but George W. Bush, he started a program called PEPFAR, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and it's still carried on to this day. And it funded the ARV treatment for millions of people around the world that had not access to that before. And so this woman now was on the ARV drugs, and she was still moving slowly, but was doing okay. I came back a year later and met this woman again, and she had put weight back on because she was on the drugs. She was a volunteer that was going house to house to help other families that had people living with HIV. And she had had all her children tested, and none of them were HIV positive. So it was a very positive story that way. Mm-hmm. And then the other story I want to share is about Amy Olson, a nice golfer, a great Christian.
She's been on this show, Amy. Amy's great.
So she shared, she wrote an article about her trip to Africa with us. And I just remember one of the lines that she had in there was, we would go up to a village that didn't have clean water, and we would walk with them to what was their water source. It could be a river, it could be just a hole in the ground. And it often, was a 20, 30 minute, 45 minute walk away from the village. And she just said she remembers one of the women turning to her and saying, "Amy, how far do you have to walk for water where you live?" Mm. And, she said, little did she know, that all I have to do is walk 20 feet from my bed, to turn on water. And so it's a very different world over there. And, we can't imagine, I think sometimes, the conditions that people live in around the world, and they can't imagine the conditions that we live here in the United States that we have here.
Man, that's such a powerful both stories are powerful stories to hear. It kind of humbles you a little bit when you hear a story like that. I'm sure it humbles you when you go there in person and see it. How has your faith in Christ strengthened since Golf Fore Africa began 15 years ago, and on these trips that you've gone on? How has that strengthened your faith in the Lord?
I think it's seeing the believers there that you meet in Africa. They're, how people say when things are going really good, you're not that dependent on God, that can happen. And, I find that to be true. I see these people there that, they really do have to pray, for healing. They have to pray for where's the next meal coming from, that kind of thing. And God's the only source. They don't really have options to walk down the street and go to McDonald's or whatever. And, you just see people living out their faith, and it seems it's somehow more real. And when we go, they have so little, but they'll offer what they have to us. They'll give us a gift. Sometimes it's a live chicken, and it's just hard until you see it face to face. It's just a level of faith that sometimes we don't get to experience here, because we aren't so dependent on God for our material needs, just very basic needs to be met.
And the next trips you have planned back to Africa soon, I think you said, right? Hopefully.
Well, right now I'm not exactly sure. If it's not this year, it'll be next year, or later in the fall this year.
Yeah, the pandemic's been so hard, I guess. Have you been able to stay in touch with some of the different areas that you've helped and served even during the pandemic?
Well, we normally, I was just on a Zoom call the other day through World Vision, and it was a WASH conference, water, sanitation, hygiene, and we were learning what's going on in the field. And there were probably 5 or 6 people that were on the call during the 2 days that were in Africa that were on the call.
Nice.
So one guy in Ghana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Kenya. So yes. And I just, to me, the heroes that I see too when I'm over there, the people who work for World Vision, the local staff, who are often living in the villages with the people, and they're really, sacrificing to come alongside and make a difference in the countries where they're living.
That's great. I love it. Golf Fore Africa, FORE, obviously. Golf Fore Africa with the connection to golf. Betsy King's our guest here on Sports Spectrum. My last question for you, where you think about God has you right now, right, in the life that you've lived, such an amazing life, so much accomplishment as a golfer, such a cool opportunity to serve and give back over these last 15 years. What do you think the great lesson that God is showing you and teaching you is right now? Like, what's he showing you? What's he teaching you when you think back to all that he's brought you to today? What's that lesson?
That's a good question. I guess if it was one word, it would be perspective, and just to keep that eternal perspective, on life, not just with having the chance to serve others, but just, the way, how crazy our world is today. And to understand, what's the worst that can happen? I die and I go to heaven. So, if you keep that perspective, I think it can keep you, not that you're not concerned with the world. I mean, I'm praying for the world, and I want things to be, more just, I think, and have more believers around the world. I just finished reading a book called Killing Christians, and it was unbelievable that talk about having to put your life on the line. People in the Middle East that had been Muslims that had converted to Christianity, and some of them were martyred for their faith just because they had converted. If you're a Muslim and you can convert to Christianity in some of these countries, it's against the law, and your life is at risk. And it's hard for us to imagine that here. But I guess it would be perspective, to make sure I keep that eternal perspective, that God's here with us, whatever we're going through. And I feel like I'm being prepared to, maybe there will be a time in our lifetime that, we will have to stand up for our faith and choose God over, something in society that by law maybe would be coming against things we believe. As Christians, that could happen, It
could. I think that's why we have to cling so tightly to our faith, so that we can stand for it if and when that ever happens. I think about what you just described, and it makes me shake my head, but why couldn't that take place anywhere we live in this world someday? We also hope for the other side too. We hope for revival as well. So we'll have to see. It's pretty clear in the Bible what God's word says about the end times. And I'm not saying we're in them, but about the end times before he comes back. So if we have to face that, man, I hope that all of us listening as believers are able to cling to that and stand up for that no matter what. So Betsy, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. It's been wonderful to get to know you. Congrats on all your success, of course, but also the work that you're doing with Golf Fore Africa is special. It really is. So thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing a little bit of your story.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you. Thank you.
And many thanks to Betsy King for being here today on Sports Spectrum. Anytime you can talk to a Hall of Famer, it is a good day on the podcast. And I love talking to legends in their sport, but particularly ones that are giving back, that are serving others. And Betsy King is doing just that. And super thankful to have her join us here today on the show. You can also learn more about the charity she talked about, Golf Fore Africa, simply at golffore, F-O-R-E, Africa.org. We'll link to that in the show notes, golfforeafrica.org. You can learn more, you can donate, and see the great work and the great difference that they're making for the kingdom. It's all faith-based and Christ-centered in serving others with the world of golf in Africa, partnering with World Vision. So great stuff there. Appreciate Betsy sharing her story here today on Sports Spectrum. We also appreciate you as well for tuning in, for checking us out. It means so much when you click that play button, when you click that subscribe button, when you click that follow button to stay in tune with all that we have going on here at Sports Spectrum. But it means even more when you share this with someone else and you let them know about Sports Spectrum, because it means you're invested. It means you believe in the mission of what we're about, and that is bringing Jesus and keeping Jesus in the sports conversation. It's what Sports Spectrum has been about now for 37 years, and we're going to continue as long as God allows us to in telling the stories of sports and faith. So again, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check out sportspectrum.com for some updated content and great resources, all for free right there at the website, sportspectrum.com. And then tune in next time and join us here on Sports Spectrum for another show, another episode on the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you soon, and please do stay safe.